Welcome, everyone, to Apkudo's new podcast, a series about trends in the connected devices industry, featuring topics from testing, automation, reverse logistics, and circularity, basically everything that happens in the lifecycle of a connected device. My name is Allyson Mitchell, and I am the Vice President of Sustainability at Apkudo. I came over from the mobile resale team when Apkudo acquired Mobile Resale. And I work with customers across enterprises, all different types, to help them understand sustainability, how it applies to their connected devices, and make the most of the environmental benefits that they will achieve by being a customer of Apkudo and Mobile Resale. I'm excited to serve as the host for this new podcast series. And our hope with this is that we will host about 2 topics per month, and we'll cover all of these different industry trends, customer journeys, circularity topics, and more. And we'd love to get your feedback and thoughts on topics or guests you'd like to hear from. So if you have ideas you'd like to share, I would encourage you to email me at allison.mitchell@apkudo.com and share those with me. We'll get into our discussion here, and then we'll take questions at the end. So if you have questions as we go through this conversation, please put them in the chat and we will get to them at the end. I'd like to introduce our first guest for this series, Randy Teal. He's the Executive Vice President of Device Processing at Apkudo. Randy, so glad you could join us for this very first session of the podcast. Wanted to let you provide a little bit of background. You have a very extensive background in this device processing space. So wanted to have you give an introduction about where you've been, how your career has evolved, and what compelled you to join Apkudo.
Absolutely, Allyson. And thank you so much for having me. I'm honored to be the first participant in this ongoing series. I'm really excited to be here and talk a little bit about what automation looks like in the industry. So a little bit about myself. I've been in the reverse supply chain space for 20 plus years. Actually started my career in the military. It was about 6 years, left as a captain. I was branched armor for any of you military buffs out there. From there, I went to business school straight out of the military, did some time on the forward supply chain side of the business, managing demand planning and some major project implementations at Cisco Systems. From Cisco, I joined Apple and a few sidebars along the way, spent a little time at Micron, understanding that supply chain. But the bulk of my time up until 2021 was spent at Apple, the entire time in Apple Care. So spent a lot of time with reverse supply chain, managing spare parts, and actually in the 2014-2015 timeframe was designated by my boss to stand up the Apple Care refurb capabilities, where we developed the concept of iPhone as is and as is plus. I left Apple in 2021, spent some time at GameStop, leading their refurbishment business unit, which was nice because it gave me an opportunity to move outside of just the iPhone ecosystem. So I've learned a lot in the last few years there. And then most recently doing some consulting this fall and joined Apkudo in the January timeframe, actually right January 1st. Very excited to be here. Currently Executive Vice President of Device Processing. What does that mean? Where Apkudo is putting automation and triage and diagnostic capabilities, we typically embed those with our customers. And my job is to make sure that every single site that we have are supporting a customer, that we are providing the SLAs and metrics and amazing output that Apkudo provides.
Awesome. So one of the things that sort of drew you into Apkudo was this focus on automation. And so how has that become a big part of this industry from the evolution that you've sort of seen through your career?
Yeah, it's a really great question. And I think we'll get into it a little bit as we talk through this. But, again, having spent a lot of time in this reverse supply chain space, thinking about the secondhand market for, in particular, mobility devices, as I was looking around at where it could have the most impact, not just from an environmental perspective, but also from a kind of business opportunity and how to improve business, which is, frankly, gotten very large, but still has a lot of fragmentation and, frankly, a lot of manual touches, which is not overly efficient. As I was looking around, I saw Apkudo. Apkudo, we're not in the business of buying and selling devices. We are in the business of creating automation and robotics, which frankly allows our customers to be more efficient and also move product with better visibility to the capabilities and the diagnostics and functional and cosmetic capabilities. So looking at Apkudo, working with Josh, who's the CEO and founder, what I saw here was a tremendous opportunity to have an impact, not just on a specific company or a specific area within the secondhand reverse supply chain space, but actually to have the opportunity to work across companies, work across systems, and really develop something that can make this business more efficient and also more economically valuable as well. So.
What seems to be causing this like increased interest and focus on automation in the industry? Is it the opportunity on the enterprise side? Is it consumer side? Is it a little bit of both? Why is automation becoming a focus?
Yeah, and I think there's a couple pieces to that, right? So obviously there's been an explosion in the secondhand market space. Some of that driven by call it regulations. Europe is very big on the right to repair and the refurbishment. US is coming on board with that as well. The reality is this has become a huge industry. I mean, you can see studies suggesting 64 million phones are going to trade hands in the next, 64 traded hands in the last first half of 2023. I've seen estimates as high as 80 to 100 million phones. It's becoming a very big marketplace. If you look at some studies, just take a number like 64 million phones based on the chain of custody from when a customer actually decides that they want to relinquish that device. And that can be because of a warranty event or a trade-in event, or even just a new product return within 30 days. Those devices, by some estimates, are being touched upwards of 64 million devices could be touched upwards of 300 million times. So if you think about that and you think about from an efficiency standpoint within the supply chain, that's a lot of extra touches, right? And every time you have to do that, it's extra manpower, it's extra resources, and frankly, that impacts the value that can be handed off to the next customer that's going to acquire that device and keep it in our supply chain.
Wow, that is a lot of repetitive motion by people. So it seems to lend itself well to automation. Can you kind of explain how technology has evolved and why, what that looks like when it comes to connected devices? How does that automation really improve the device processing?
Yeah, and I think that this is really important, and it's very timely that we're having this discussion now, just around automation and robotics. What the automation can do is really assist the overall industry with becoming more efficient, with standardizing and creating a very consistent result as the device is processed through whatever facility it's going through. If you think about automation, this is not a new concept, right? And I can tell you back when I was in Apple Care, leading the refurbishment team back in 2017, 2018, we started looking for automation, and the reality is that the technology was just not there yet. Machine learning was a focus. We started to leverage a little bit of that, but robotics in general and automation in general was still really expensive, and that made it very difficult to create basically a solid ROI. What we've seen now, and I hate to talk about AI as a buzzword, but the reality is the technical computing power has absolutely improved in the last 7 years, which helps, and the price of robotics has started to drop as well. If you think about robot arms or think about automation in general, it's becoming much more affordable. And what we've seen in the last probably 12 or 24 months, don't quote me on the time frame, that reduction in cost, that increase in kind of processing capability at a reasonable price really has made robotics a much more affordable option. And so what we've seen now is that price point can beat what a manual labor operation can actually achieve, not just from a price point, but you get the added benefits of being able to create consistency in your grading. And I'm sure anybody on this call understands, how hard it is to get consistent manual grading. There's opportunity there, as well as really digitizing the overall footprint for the diagnostics, whether it's the functional testing or the cosmetic. So now is a great time. It's a good opportunity.
That's awesome. Well, it reminds me of when I was in my background prior to being in this role was in recycling, consumer, household material recycling. And similar situation, I think, happened in that industry where it started as a very manual process to begin with people, inherent limitations there. As robotic arms came in, they were more efficient, but limited also because of the cost. And then, there's always that fear, I think, that the machines are going to take over. But what has been found to be true in that industry is that it's a symbiotic relationship between the manual labor force and the robots, where they can specialize and support each other. Have you seen that similar integration of manual labor to robotics to really optimize their roles and responsibilities and their capabilities?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think to your point, even on automated solutions today, the capability to completely eliminate the human touch doesn't necessarily exist. But when you think about automation in general, you can reduce the labor force for sure and bring down the cost, but also stabilize that headcount, right? Indirect and direct labor are very important here. And as you're automating that device processing, basically pulling people off some specific tasks within the line, and at the same time getting higher quality output and more consistent output. It creates a great opportunity to do one increase the overall scalability, but two, also accelerate your volume and your ability to handle capacity as you ebb and flow in the marketplace. And if you think about it on an annualized basis, there are absolutely peak seasons for returns where you get a surge in trade-in, which generally leads to a surge in volume, and then there's lower periods. If you're running a highly manual capability or highly manual process, that requires a lot of hiring. And frankly, if you want to be optimized from a pricing perspective, you also got to work that workforce back down again. That creates challenges, even exacerbating the ability to be consistent and have trained people that know exactly how to evaluate a device as it's going through the reverse supply chain.
Well, and you said earlier that automation isn't really new to this industry, but it has expanded. How do other automated solutions in this space compare to what Apkudo solution is?
Yeah, I think there are a lot of places, a lot of companies that are offering robotics. What we've seen, and frankly, I went through this when I was within AppleCare as well. A lot of the solutions are more oriented on like specific point solutions. So they try to address certain specific concepts or areas within that reverse supply chain. Maybe it's a kind of a single bot that will automate some of the functional testing, for example, but it still requires a lot of human interaction, right? So you have to feed the device, you have to empty, take the device back off. So you can get some consistency, but then you don't really get the labor cost savings. The other challenge is a lot of folks that are offering cosmetic solutions. Cosmetic evaluation is a very big challenge. And this is where kind of the machine learning AI concept really comes into play. It's not easy. You've got to run, in some cases, millions of devices through that learning model, and that creates a challenge. The good news is for us at Apkudo, our current automation solutions processed somewhere between 14 and 17 million devices last year. So we have a lot of data. So we are able to continue to accelerate and enhance our AI machine learning models. And that allows us to kind of stay ahead of the competition as far as being able to accurately grade from a cosmetic perspective and offer customers the ability to tailor the grading needs to their own specs. So it's very helpful.
So I imagine you have different types of customers that you're talking to. Can you kind of share with me the different types some might be higher volume, some might be lower volume, or more consistent, more versus more variable in terms of that volume? Can you sort of explain to me the types of customers that you're interfacing with and how their needs might different as it relates to automation?
Absolutely. In my mind, right, probably everyone can benefit from some level of automation. And we'll kind of talk about where we start thinking about return on investment and what it takes to actually create a cost-effective automation capabilities. But the reality is there's a lot of different types of customers that can benefit from automation. They all have different needs from a low volume or medium volume, depends on what their focus is as far as channels that they're looking to process those devices into. or even just how they're acquiring. Most of my recent conversations have been with kind of high volume processors and how we can continue to allow them to scale and handle massive volumes, which, done manually could be 200 or 300 people, which is pretty sizable. That said, at the end of the day, as these devices move from one customer's hands into another, a need for accurate cosmetic and functional triaging and being able to evaluate those devices remains the same. So that the value of robotics should span across all sizes of companies.
So speaking of ROI, can you explain what some of those advantages are that customers will gain from working with Apkudo?
Yeah, for sure. One of the challenges with robotics historically, right, is they can be very expensive. So whether you decide, as a company, you're deciding, hey, I want to get into robotics and do some automation, I want to develop it myself, that is a significant investment in time and effort. And, even if you're purchasing products, those can still be very expensive. So it kind of puts you into this conversation of, do you want to build it or do you want to buy it? And then the question is, what's your stomach for when that ROI can kind of flip you from a cost drain to cost neutral and into actually saving yourself some money. That, depending on the quality of the people that you purchase, which also depends on how much you're going to spend, can become a very expensive proposition. One of the things that we've seen, just from a financial consideration, thinking about the cost, the opportunity to defer those upfront costs by leveraging an existing solution or something that's been developed in the marketplace can be a very good option. And depending on the model, if you work on like a lease kind of concept, you can actually defer some of those upfront costs as well, so that you're actually consuming or paying for that process and that capability as you're executing and processing those devices. So shifting away from CapEx, if you will, with large upfront cost, putting it into your OpEx, where you can actually generate revenue while you're paying for those robotics.
One thing I've learned a lot about Apkudo solution is that you can, with that customizable in terms of how much you want to adopt in automation early and then sort of add modules to complete that cycle of tasks that can be automated. Is that a path that customers take often, as they kind of start with a particular portion of the process and then expand as they capture that ROI through the process?
Yeah, absolutely. And again, not to talk specifically about Apkudo, but in general, when you think about kind of large automated capabilities, the best example I can give is, think about carriers, right? So they will typically offer a phone sometimes for free to their customers, but then they tack a $44 a month fee on that for a set period of time. Doing that with robotics and automation, that gives the customer the ability to kind of move and pay for the product as they're actually utilizing it. Now, as far as what an automated capability can do for a customer, and again, thinking about Apkudo's automation in particular, what we've seen is cost neutral from transitioning from a manual process into a fully automated process. We are seeing with some of our larger customers that you can be basically cost neutral versus that manual process. It's somewhere between 20 to 25,000 units a month. Now that factor is obviously variable based on what the labor rates are within a certain region. But the good news for us from an Apkudo perspective is, if you've got an automated solution and you can be break even or better at 25,000 devices a month, let's say, our system, if you're willing to run it two shifts, basically 6 days a week, we can peak at monthly volume somewhere close to 100,000 a month. So that gives you a ton of upside on just the cost of equipment, where you can move from cost neutral to major cost benefits and be able to scale efficiently and cleanly, essentially with the same number of headcount that you would be doing 25,000 units a month on. I guess the exception being when you have to add a second shift, but still you're adding that at a significantly reduced number of headcount needed.
Yeah, that's a huge factor in the consideration, is the headcount.
Yeah.
If someone is considering automation versus a traditional device processing, what's one piece of advice that you would offer somebody that's making that consideration?
Yeah, that's actually a really good question, right? And again, understanding that every customer, every operation is going to be slightly different. There's a lot of variables in this space, and frankly, a lot of diversity around how those devices move from the original customer to essentially the new customer who will continue to enjoy utilizing that. There's a couple pieces of advice that make sense. So one, you got to think about the consistency and quality of your grading. Anybody that's tried to buy and sell phones will tell you what you're actually buying. It's like the used car business, right? You're going to be profitable or not profitable a lot of times based on the actual purchase, not necessarily the sell of that device. So if you want to offer higher quality, if you can be consistent with your products, and if you can purchase from somebody in the same space, that gives you confidence that the product that you can offer or that you are offering is going to be what you say it is. And the reality is, iPhones in particular, but this applies across all different models and aerospace and mobility. There is a market price that sits out there, and offering or the ability to pay as close to that market price as and frankly get that from a revenue perspective as possible is always the goal. Knowing what you're getting and having your customers know that what you're providing is consistent week over week, month over month, year over year can be really valuable. The second piece is, the number of touches in a warehouse obviously have a massive impact on the amount of what your costs are to, in order to process those devices. The average, a typical operations manager or general manager for a warehouse, they're always looking how to be more efficient, how to reduce your costs. And often, and I've seen value stream mapping and different types of exercise, the number of touches can have a massive impact on that. So if you can eliminate those touches and get high quality and consistency in your output, you are going to be basically you're going to create the optimal cost for processing those devices. Getting consistency and quality and driving down the cost, that is a rare combination. So
Mm, yeah, I could I could see that. When it comes to, thinking about the data that you can get from the process, where does that fit into what adds value to automation?
yeah, it's actually another really, really strong point, right? It's one thing to have super efficient, low cost processing within the warehouse. In order to take advantage of that, in order to really monetize that and really understand the decisioning process for where those products should go once they're processed, really comes down to your ability to kind of automate and capture that data. And again, thinking about consistency of triage, if you will, functional and cosmetic, being able to put that data into a platform, being able to manage that data and have it in real time or even near real time can be a huge advantage. Time is money when you're thinking about the secondhand phones. You really want to move them into the next customer's hands as fast as possible. And being able to aggregate that data can help, one, save you a lot of time on your own analytics. If you're building decision making processes on top of all of that data that is being captured in the exact same way every time, that can add a ton of value to the overall operations. And some of that is not just realized through cost per unit for processing, but also in your ability to improve your cash on cash cycle and the ability to share critical data with your customers, which then gives them confidence that what you're giving them is what you said you were giving them. And that obviously leads to stronger relationships, consistent purchasing and sourcing, and also ultimately higher dollar value.
Yeah. Well, I know you worked at Apple for a long time, and I am just curious, they are kind of leading in a lot of ways the concept of sustainability and in, connected devices. They've made some very strong statements and put out some very important goals around that, especially as it relates to the circularity of their products. I'm just curious as how has sort of being in that environment coming from Apple, how did that sort of impact you and what you felt was important, especially, as you think about where you're going to go in your career?
Yeah, absolutely. And having spent a lot of time in Apple Care over the years, I was fortunate enough to partner with Apple's environmental sustainability team extensively, and I can tell you the focus is amazing, right? And it's not just on, well, certainly it doesn't even have to do directly with cash value. It's how do we recycle, how do we repurpose products all the way from extending the life of the existing product to responsible recycling, and how do you actually utilize the raw materials and make sure that those are getting fed back into the supply chain. I'd say I learned a lot working with that team and thinking about it from, the 600-pound gorilla perspective of Apple. What I can say though is just, and again, as I was thinking about joining Apkudo and thinking about what Apkudo can and is doing for the secondhand industry and circularity in general, I feel like it meshes really well with Apple. It's focused on longevity, how to accurately move devices with minimal amount of touch, transferring that data from place to place. So ideally, in a perfect world, the devices that are coming back would be assessed as quickly as possible for what is the best channel, not just from a monetization perspective, but frankly also from a environmental perspective, right? If that device can be put into another customer's hands, that's great. But even what happens when it moves beyond the life of being able to be utilized by a customer? Our products help that longevity, that grading and device management through the process fits very well. And I know Apkudo, we are not limited to a single element, single channel, single space, right? So, we can work with customers that are at the point of receipt from the original customer all the way to an e-com player who is basically trying to source devices and actually move those back into another customer's hands. So yeah, it's been great so far. It's only been a few months, but the vision is very well aligned with kind of the circular economy and how we can do a better job as a planet, basically.
Awesome. Yeah. I've got one more question for Randy, just give him an opportunity to share anything else that we haven't covered during our discussion so far. But I also want to just pause and make sure I invite our listeners to submit any questions in the Q&A that have come up for them as they're listening, so we could get a chance to respond to those before we wrap up today's session. But Randy, I just wanted to give you a chance to see if there's any other things about automation, about your role, about, even evolution of the industry, things that you've seen over time that we haven't covered so far that you want to share before we wrap this up.
Yeah, I mean, I just think in general, like again, thinking about automation, thinking about robotics, there's obviously been a big focus on that on the forward supply chain. And I mean, I don't. All you have to do is if you ever have a chance to walk into like an Amazon fulfillment center or something like that, right? There's a ton of innovation that's happening on that forward supply chain. And not to talk about my experience in particular, but like reverse supply chain has unique challenges. And so doing robotics for devices that have been basically, let's say, in the customer's hands, we call it in the wild, right? Creates a unique challenge. And having I hate to keep using Apple as an example, but at Apple they focus very narrowly, not narrowly, but they focus down in how do you produce, I don't know what they're doing this now, 250 million iPhones a year, and every single one of them, depending on model, exactly the same. It looks the same, it operates the same, it's got the same quality standards, it's all been tested. Once that device is in a customer's hands and comes back, it's going to be in some ways unique. It might be the scratches, the dings, the actual functional testing. We all know that as soon as the device gets into a customer's hands, it may or may not work exactly as it was when it came out of the box. Developing automation for that, especially when you think about the myriad of form factors, how the the secondhand supply chain works. You don't just get an iPhone 11 64 coming in and have to process that one device. You're going to have 3, 4, 5 generations of iPhones. You've got all the different Android OEMs, whether it's Samsung or Google or OnePlus. There's a bunch of them out there. It becomes a unique challenge. And when you try to automate something where you're trying to handle different form factors at the same time, everything is a little bit different. It creates a unique challenge. And I think that's probably why, kind of back to your early point, you're asking about like what automation is out there that supports the secondhand mobility space. It's a unique challenge. And kind of going all in end-to-end robotics and being able to process, 150 different models in a single day without having to batch them, et cetera, that is ripe for automation. And having developed the capability to think about it, not just from a functional test perspective, but from a cosmetic perspective, It's a big challenge, and I think being here at Apkudo, we've cracked that code, and we've cracked it in a way that allows us to be cost competitive with that manual process as well. And so, kind of back to the other points, it's kind of getting a twofer. You get better quality, consistent grading, and you can reduce the cost. So that's a huge opportunity.
Awesome. Well, we got a couple of questions here from the audience, so I'll voice those for you, Andy. And if we need clarification, we can reach out to our participants here. But Charles asked, what percentage of units pass through versus what percentage fail? And what are the top reasons that units fail as they go through device processing?
So when you do a triage, traditional grading models will say A, B, C, D, or F, or E, depends on how you want to calculate it. What our automation does is we don't decide what's a pass or a fail. What our system does is complete grading on all the functional testing, and then creates call it a cosmetic footprint by which we can align that to what the customer's needs are. So the question of how many pass and how many fail, the reality is, unless the screen is like smashed, in which case we have another solution for that. If the screen is totally smashed, or if the unit's heavily bent, those are things that cause us a challenge from an automation perspective. But the reality is, when we evaluate a device, or a device is processed through the Apkudo automation line, the pass or fail is really dependent on what the customer wants to designate it as.
So the customer basically sets the threshold for where that line is.
Yep. And that's the beauty of it. We are not offering a solution that's take it or leave it. It's not our grading, it's your grading. We can customize that. We will present to you, the system itself will record and capture and present to the customer and basically can be uploaded through the cloud, every functional test. And then that customer can help, tell us how they want us to grade that. And we can obviously designate that, but it's all based on a system integration. So,
awesome.
Hope that answered the question.
Yeah, you did. Fergal asked the question, there are back in the marketplace now are these foldable phones. So Fergal's question is about what's the latest on the processing of these foldable phones? That the flip phone is sort of back, but in a new way.
Fergal, thank you very much for that question. It's actually a really good one. Samsung is having quite a bit of success with those flips and folds. The current RFA line, our main high volume processing line today, cannot accommodate the flips and the folds, because as you can imagine, it's an extra step. That said, we have appropriate for the volume. We have a smaller kind of standalone system that is essentially in late stage prototype right now, that will be able to handle those flips and folds. It also is set up for the larger form factors. So think about tablets, whether it's a Surface or the various iPads that are out there. As we've been developing this flip and fold capability, that will also be able to handle tablets and the like. So definitely a burgeoning form factor within the marketplace, and something that we're addressing.
Yep. That's great. Well, and that just shows you the customization that's available when you have a solution that is able to sort of be updated and follow the trends, not only in the software and the functionality, but in those form factors as well. Kamal has a question here in the Q&A. What's the lowest level of customization allowed for any particular device?
I'm not sure if I understand that, but let me just take a stab at it. And feel free to clarify, Kamal, if I don't get this right. We have a finite number of tests, for example, right? But give you an example, audio, right? So, a typical manual solution today, the audio test is they ding a sound, and the person that's evaluating the phone says, I can hear it or I can't. When we actually do the audio test, we actually create that decibel profile. So we don't just test that the speakers, for example, are making sound. We actually look at it, how it fits within that threshold. If somebody wanted to kind of tighten up that spec, and I can tell you that that's how it's done when those devices ship out initially, we have that capability. So if we have that test, which again, we have at least as many tests as anything else out there in the space. If we have that test and we can render it, and the customer wants to manipulate some parameters within that test from a functional perspective, we can absolutely do that. Similar thing with cosmetics, right? What our system does is it will basically takes a picture, converts all of those, some people call them defects, some people call them artifacts. It will convert all of that and then creates basically a blueprint of that device. And then the algorithm that we use, AI assisted, if you will, through machine learning, we can customize that to whatever you want to call it. If you want 4 scratches to be a B grade in these areas, we can do that. If you want it to make it 5, we can do that. So there's a lot of customization that can happen.
Well, Randy, I really appreciate you sharing your expertise in this space and telling us about the benefits of automation for device processing. It can be a little bit confusing for folks who aren't in that space, and seeing that it truly is the behind the curtain for the magic that Apkudo does to process these devices and get them to a place that can be sold and bring the highest value as quickly as possible for as many devices as possible. So I really appreciate your expertise and sharing that with us. I have a feeling you'll be back on future sessions. You're a wealth of knowledge, and I'm sure topics that you are very knowledgeable about will come up again in future discussions. So I'm sure we'll see you back on here again. And for our listeners, thank you so much for being part of today's session. Hopefully you found this information valuable, and we obviously welcome your feedback on today's session and ideas you have for future ones. So please feel free to email me, allison.mitchell@apkudo.com, if you have suggestions or feedback to share. And I just want to say thanks again for everyone for joining us, and we will see you at the next one.
That's great. And just before we take off, Allison, thank you for hosting, and you're an excellent interviewer, so I appreciate that. And
awesome. Thanks, Randy.